The German Shepherd hadn't stopped barking for 11 minutes straight. His claws scraped against the mahogany coffin with desperate fury. His howls echoed through the silent chapel like thunder rolling through a graveyard. 200 mourners sat frozen in the wooden pews, watching in stunned disbelief as the aging dog threw himself against the casket again and again. But when the widow finally rose from her seat and demanded they open that coffin, what they discovered inside changed everything anyone thought they knew about Captain James Mitchell. No one was prepared for the secret her dead husband had been hiding. No one understood how the dog knew it was there. And what happened in the next 60 seconds would leave this small Ohio town talking for generations. Before we continue with this incredible story, if you're new here, take a moment right now to subscribe to this channel and tap that notification bell. We bring you the most powerful stories of loyalty, love, and the unbreakable bonds that connect us to our beloved animals. Drop a comment below telling us about your own loyal pet, and hit that like button if you believe that some connections go beyond what words can explain. Now, let me take you back to where this heartbreaking journey truly began. It all started at Greenwood Chapel in Cedar Falls, Ohio, a quiet town nestled along the Maumee River where everybody knew everybody and secrets rarely stayed buried for long. Greenwood Chapel had stood on the corner of Maple Street and Fifth Avenue for over 120 years. Generations of Cedar Falls families had said their final goodbyes within these walls. Weddings, baptisms, funerals. The old stone building had witnessed every shade of human joy and sorrow. But no one who walked through those heavy oak doors on this particular October morning could have predicted what was about to unfold. The air hung heavy with grief. White lilies lined the altar, their sweet fragrance mixing with the musty smell of old hymnals and polished wood. A mahogany coffin rested at the front of the chapel, draped in an American flag that had been folded and refolded with military precision. Brass handles gleamed under the soft glow of hanging chandeliers. Outside, October wind rattled the stained glass windows. Amber and crimson leaves swirled past the frosted panes like nature itself was paying its respects. Gray clouds pressed low against the sky, threatening rain that wouldn't come until nightfall. Inside, 200 people filled every available seat. Firefighters in dress uniforms occupied the first 3 rows on the left side, their brass buttons polished to a mirror shine, their faces carved from stone. Neighbors clutched tissues. Old friends dabbed at reddened eyes. Mayor Patricia Coleman sat near the back, her presence a testament to how deeply this loss had shaken the entire community. At the front of it all stood a German shepherd named Max. And something was terribly, terribly wrong. Max wasn't always like this. For 7 years, he had been the pride of the Cedar Falls Fire Department, a decorated search and rescue dog whose name had appeared in the local newspaper more times than anyone could count. He was brave, focused, absolutely unstoppable when lives hung in the balance. In the spring of 2019, a tornado had torn through the east side of Cedar Falls, reducing an entire apartment complex to twisted metal and shattered dreams. Max had worked for 36 hours straight, his nose pressed to the rubble, his paws bleeding against broken glass and jagged concrete. He found 11 survivors that week. 11 people who went home to their families because a dog refused to give up. A year later, 7-year-old Emma Lawson vanished during a church camping trip in Thornwood Forest. Search parties combed 20 square miles for 3 agonizing days. Helicopters, volunteers, thermal imaging. Nothing worked. Everyone had started preparing for the worst. Then Max picked up her scent near an abandoned hunting cabin 4 miles off the main trail. Emma came home alive. The town threw Max a parade. The mayor gave him a ceremonial key to the city. Children lined up to pet him. He became a legend, proof that heroes don't always walk on 2 legs. But 2 years ago, everything changed. Max's hips began to fail. Arthritis crept into his joints like rust eating through iron. The veterinarian delivered the news gently but firmly: no more active fieldwork. No more rescue missions. No more saving lives. Retirement. For a dog who had spent every waking moment serving others, the word felt like a death sentence. But Captain James Mitchell refused to let his partner fade away. James adopted Max officially, bringing him home to the small blue house on Riverside Drive where Sarah Mitchell was already waiting with a water bowl and a bed by the fireplace. From that day forward, Max became James' shadow. Where James went, Max followed. They ate breakfast together, watched football together, fell asleep on the couch together during lazy Sunday afternoons. They were inseparable. Max had finally found peace in his golden years, a quiet life filled with belly rubs and backyard squirrels and the steady heartbeat of a man who loved him unconditionally. Then came the fire on Oak Street. 3 weeks ago, at exactly 2:14 in the morning, a blaze erupted in the Riverside apartment complex. Faulty wiring in a third-floor unit. Flames spread faster than anyone anticipated, crawling through walls and ceilings like living creatures hungry for destruction. Captain James Mitchell was first on the scene. He didn't hesitate. He never did. James charged into the inferno and emerged 4 minutes later carrying Maria Gonzalez and her 2 young children, a 5-year-old boy and a 3-year-old girl, both unconscious from smoke inhalation. Paramedics rushed them to waiting ambulances. All 3 survived. But James wasn't finished. Maria was screaming about her mother. 81-year-old Gabriela Gonzalez was still trapped on the 3rd floor, immobile from a recent hip surgery, unable to escape on her own. James radioed his position and went back inside. The ceiling collapsed at 2:31 a.m. 16 hours later, they recovered his body from beneath a mountain of charred timber and molten steel. Captain James Mitchell was 43 years old. He left behind a wife, a dog, and a secret that no one knew existed. Now Max stood in Greenwood Chapel, staring at the coffin that held his best friend. And he would not stop barking. At first, the mourners exchanged sympathetic glances. A grieving dog. How heartbreaking. How loyal. Someone whispered that it was the saddest thing they had ever witnessed. But as the minutes stretched on, sympathy turned to confusion. Confusion turned to unease. Max wasn't crying. He wasn't whimpering the way dogs do when they mourn. He was alerting. His ears stood straight up like 2 black triangles aimed at an invisible target. His body remained rigid, muscles coiled tight beneath his graying fur. His bark had a sharpness to it, an urgency that felt almost desperate. Sarah Mitchell sat frozen in the front pew, her black dress too tight around her chest, her lungs refusing to draw full breath. She watched Max circle the coffin for the 7th time, his nails scraping against the polished wood with each frantic pass. She knew that stance. She knew that bark. For 3 years, she had watched James train Max in their backyard. Hundreds of drills. Thousands of repetitions. She had memorized every signal, every alert, every subtle shift in the dog's behavior. And right now, Max was giving the exact same alert he gave when he found someone alive beneath collapsed buildings. But that was impossible. James was gone. She had identified his body at the morgue. She had signed the paperwork. She had chosen the casket and the flowers and the hymns. Her husband was dead. So why was Max acting like he had found a survivor? Captain Rodriguez from Station 7 rose slowly from his seat, his weathered hand extended toward the agitated dog. His voice was calm but firm, the voice of a man who had handled crisis situations for over 20 years. Easy, boy. Easy now. It's okay. You're okay. Max ignored him completely. The barking intensified. The scraping grew louder. A low growl rumbled from somewhere deep in his chest, a sound no one in that chapel had ever heard him make before. Something was wrong. Something was very, very wrong. And Sarah Mitchell was about to discover a truth that would change her life forever. She just didn't know it yet. Pastor Bradley cleared his throat nervously from the pulpit, his prepared eulogy sitting untouched on the wooden stand before him. Perhaps someone should take the dog outside? This is becoming quite disruptive. Murmurs of agreement rippled through the congregation. Heads nodded. A few mourners shifted toward the aisle, ready to assist. But before anyone could move, Max did something that made every single person in Greenwood Chapel hold their breath. He stopped barking at the coffin. He turned his massive head slowly, deliberately, until his dark brown eyes locked directly onto Sarah Mitchell. And then he walked toward her. Not running. Not frantic. Calm. Purposeful. Certain. He stopped directly in front of the widow, his graying muzzle level with her trembling hands. And then, in front of 200 witnesses, he pressed his nose against her stomach. Sarah's blood turned to ice. To be continued in Chapter 2. Sarah couldn't breathe. The German Shepherd's cold nose pressed firmly against her abdomen, holding there with an intensity that made her skin prickle beneath the black fabric of her dress. His eyes never left hers, ancient, knowing, desperate to communicate something her human mind couldn't yet comprehend. 200 people watched in stunned silence. No one moved. No one spoke. No one dared to break whatever strange spell had fallen over Greenwood Chapel in that suspended moment. Sarah's heart hammered against her ribs like a trapped bird fighting for escape. Her hands trembled at her sides. Her mouth went dry as desert sand. What was happening? Why was Max doing this? She had known this dog for 3 years. She had fed him dinner every night while James worked late shifts at the station. She had brushed his coat on Sunday mornings while coffee brewed in the kitchen. She had fallen asleep on the couch with his warm body pressed against her feet during cold winter evenings. She knew Max. And she had never, not once, seen him behave like this. "Max," she whispered, her voice cracking like thin ice. "What are you doing, boy? What's wrong?" The dog held his position for 3 eternal seconds. His nose pressed against her stomach with gentle but unmistakable purpose. His breathing was steady. His body was calm. He wasn't confused. He wasn't grieving. He was trying to tell her something. Then, just as suddenly as he had approached, Max pulled away. He turned back toward the coffin. His posture shifted from gentle to urgent in the span of a single heartbeat. The barking resumed, sharper than before, echoing off the chapel's vaulted ceiling like gunfire. But now his focus had narrowed. He wasn't barking at the coffin itself anymore. He was pawing at one specific spot, James' dress uniform jacket. His claws scraped against the polished wood directly above where James' chest would be, where his pockets would be. Something was in there. Something Max needed her to find. Sarah rose from the pew on legs that felt like water. Her heels clicked against the hardwood floor, each step echoing through the deafening silence. She could feel 200 pairs of eyes burning into her back, watching, waiting, wondering if the widow had finally lost her mind to grief. Maybe she had. Maybe this was what madness felt like, following the desperate signals of an aging dog during your husband's funeral while the entire town watched in horrified fascination. But something deep in Sarah's gut told her this was different. James had trained Max for years. This dog had saved lives. He had found survivors when trained professionals had given up hope. His instincts had never been wrong before. Why would they be wrong now? Her mother-in-law Linda grabbed her wrist as she passed, fingernails digging into soft flesh. "Sarah, stop this right now. You're embarrassing yourself. You're embarrassing James' memory. Sit down and let someone remove that animal before this gets any worse." Sarah pulled away without a word. She kept walking. Captain Rodriguez stepped into her path, his broad shoulders blocking her view of the coffin. His voice was gentle but firm, the voice of a man trying to prevent a grieving widow from doing something she would regret. "Mrs. Mitchell, I know this is hard. I know you're hurting. But this isn't the way. Let me take Max outside and we can move." The word came out harder than Sarah intended. Colder. More certain. Captain Rodriguez blinked in surprise. In 23 years of service, he had never heard Sarah Mitchell speak with such commanding authority. He stepped aside. Sarah reached the coffin and dropped to her knees beside Max. The dog immediately stopped barking. His tail wagged once, just once, as if to say, "Finally, you're listening." She placed her hand on his trembling shoulder. "Show me," she whispered. "Show me what you need me to find." Max pressed his nose against the side of the coffin, directly over James' jacket pocket. He whimpered softly, urgently, his dark eyes pleading with her to understand. Sarah looked up at funeral director Thomas Green, who stood frozen near the altar with a face pale as fresh snow. His hands were clasped tightly in front of him, knuckles white with tension. "Open it." The words fell from her mouth like stones dropped into still water. Gasps erupted through the congregation. Someone in the back let out a strangled cry of disbelief. Linda Mitchell pressed both hands over her mouth, tears streaming down her powdered cheeks. Thomas Green shook his head slowly, his professional composure cracking at the edges. "Mrs. Mitchell, I don't think that's appropriate. The viewing was yesterday. The casket has been sealed according to your own instructions. Perhaps we should." "I said open it." Sarah's voice echoed through the chapel with surprising force. She didn't recognize the sound of it, this commanding tone that had risen from somewhere deep within her chest. This wasn't the soft-spoken kindergarten teacher who baked cookies for the firefighters at Station 7. This wasn't the quiet wife who always let others take the lead. This was something else entirely. This was a woman who suddenly understood that her husband had been keeping secrets. Pastor Bradley approached cautiously, his worn Bible clutched against his chest like a shield. "Sarah, dear, I understand you're experiencing tremendous grief. Loss can make us do things that—" Pastor Bradley. Sarah turned to face him directly, her eyes red but steady. "My husband trained this dog to find survivors. For 7 years, Max never gave a false alert. Not once. If he says there's something in that coffin that I need to find, then I believe him. Now someone is going to help me open this casket, or I will do it myself." Silence. Complete, absolute silence. Then Captain Rodriguez stepped forward. "I'll do it." Linda Mitchell let out a sob of protest. Several mourners shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Thomas Green opened his mouth to object, then closed it again, recognizing the futility of arguing. Captain Rodriguez approached the coffin with measured steps. His thick fingers found the latches on either side. He looked at Sarah one final time, giving her a chance to change her mind. She nodded. The latches clicked open. The lid rose slowly, revealing Captain James Mitchell in his dress uniform. Brass buttons gleamed under the chandelier light. His hands were folded peacefully across his chest. His face looked almost serene, as if he were merely sleeping and might wake at any moment. But Max wasn't interested in James' face. The dog pushed past Thomas Green and pressed his nose directly against James' jacket pocket. He nudged once. Twice. His whimpering grew more insistent, more desperate. Something was definitely in there. Sarah reached past the funeral director with trembling fingers. She slipped her hand inside the pocket of her dead husband's uniform, the same uniform he had worn proudly for 18 years, the same uniform that still smelled faintly of smoke and coffee and everything that made James who he was. Her fingers closed around something small. Something velvet. Something that had no business being hidden in a dead man's pocket. She pulled it out slowly, her heart pounding so loudly she was certain everyone in the chapel could hear it. A ring box. Small. Black velvet. Clearly expensive. But that made no sense. They had been married for 6 years. She already had her engagement ring and wedding band. She was wearing them right now. So what was this? Sarah opened the box with trembling hands. Inside, resting on a bed of white silk, was a tiny silver ring, far too small for any adult finger. It was delicate. Beautiful. Clearly antique. And engraved along the inside of the band were 3 words that made Sarah's entire world stop spinning. For our future. A ring sized for an infant. A message about a future James would never see. But that wasn't what made Sarah's blood run cold. It was the folded piece of paper tucked beneath the velvet lining. Worn at the edges. Written in James' unmistakable handwriting. A letter from her dead husband. A letter that was about to reveal a secret so profound, so heartbreaking, so beautiful that Sarah Mitchell would never be the same person again. She unfolded the paper with shaking hands. And began to read. Sarah's eyes moved across the worn paper, each word hitting her like a physical blow to the chest. The handwriting was unmistakably James. She had seen it 1,000 times before, on grocery lists stuck to the refrigerator, on birthday cards that made her laugh until she cried, on little love notes he tucked into her lunch bag when she wasn't looking. But these words were different. These words carried the weight of a secret he had never gotten the chance to share. Her lips moved silently as she read, her voice too broken to speak aloud. But her mind absorbed every syllable, every carefully chosen phrase, every drop of love her husband had poured onto this single piece of paper. "My dearest Sarah," the letter began. "By the time you read this, I hope I'm standing right beside you, watching your face as you realize what I'm about to tell you. I've been practicing my speech for 12 days now. I've rehearsed it in the shower, in the truck on my way to work, in my head during every boring meeting Captain Rodriguez forces us to sit through." Sarah let out a sound somewhere between a laugh and a sob. That was so perfectly James, making her smile even while her heart was shattering into a million pieces. She continued reading. "I was going to take you to Martinelli's on Saturday night. You know, that Italian place downtown where we had our first date? I already made the reservation. Table 7, by the window overlooking the river. I was going to order that expensive wine you love, but never let me buy because you say it's too fancy for a Tuesday. Except it wouldn't be a Tuesday. It would be the most important Saturday of our entire lives." Tears streamed down Sarah's face, dripping onto the fragile paper. She didn't wipe them away. She couldn't move. She could barely breathe. "I was going to wait until dessert. You always order the tiramisu, even though you complain about the calories for 3 days afterward. I was going to let you take exactly 2 bites. And then I was going to reach across the table, take your hand, and tell you something I've been dying to say for almost 2 weeks." Sarah's chest heaved. She could picture it so clearly, the candlelight flickering in James' eyes, his nervous smile, his thumb rubbing circles on the back of her hand the way he always did when he had something important to say. But that dinner never happened. That Saturday never came. Because James ran into a burning building and never came out. "Sarah, you're pregnant." The words blurred as fresh tears flooded her eyes. She blinked rapidly, desperate to keep reading, desperate to hear everything her husband needed to tell her. "I know you don't know yet. The doctor's appointment isn't until next month, and you've been so busy with school starting that you haven't noticed the signs. But I noticed. And more importantly, Max noticed." Sarah glanced down at the German shepherd still sitting faithfully beside the open coffin. His dark eyes met hers with an expression that almost seemed to say, "I told you so." "You know how Max has been following you around the house lately? Pressing against your stomach? Sleeping outside the bathroom door every morning while you get ready for work? That's not random, sweetheart. That's not clingy behavior. That's a trained search and rescue dog detecting something his human nose has no business detecting." Sarah pressed her free hand against her abdomen, feeling suddenly dizzy. Was it possible? Could she really be? "I confirmed it myself," the letter continued. "I bought a test at the pharmacy in Riverside, drove all the way to the next town because I didn't want anyone in Cedar Falls gossiping before I had the chance to tell you properly. The test was positive. I took 3 more just to be sure. All positive." Sarah's knees buckled. She would have collapsed to the floor if Captain Rodriguez hadn't stepped forward and steadied her with a firm hand on her elbow. "Easy," he murmured. "I've got you." But Sarah barely heard him. Her entire universe had narrowed to the words on that crinkled piece of paper, words from a dead man, words that were rewriting everything she thought she knew about her life. "I know I should have told you right away," James wrote. "I know keeping secrets isn't fair, especially a secret this big. But I wanted it to be perfect. I wanted to see your face when you realized we created something together. I wanted to hold you while you cried happy tears. I wanted to stay up all night talking about names and nursery colors and whether the baby would have your eyes or my ridiculous ears." A broken laugh escaped Sarah's lips. James' ears were ridiculous, slightly too big, always turning red when he was embarrassed. She used to tease him about them constantly. Now she would give anything to see those ears one more time. "The ring in the box belonged to my grandmother," the letter continued. "She wore it as an infant, and so did my mother, and so did I for exactly 3 days before my father lost it in the couch cushions and my mother nearly divorced him on the spot." Sarah smiled through her tears, imagining a young James father tearing apart the living room searching for a tiny ring while his wife stood over him with murder in her eyes. "I found it last year when we were cleaning out Mom's attic after she moved to the nursing home. I knew immediately what I wanted to do with it. I was saving it, waiting for the right moment. And now that moment is here." Sarah turned the ring box over in her trembling hands, studying the delicate silver band with new understanding. This wasn't just jewelry. This was 4 generations of Mitchell family history. This was a legacy. A legacy James wanted to pass on to their child. If you're reading this letter the way I hope you are, with me standing beside you at Martinelli's, watching your beautiful face light up, then I need you to know something. I am the happiest man alive. I have everything I ever wanted. A job I love. A dog who thinks he's smarter than me. And a wife who makes every single day worth living. Sarah's vision blurred completely. She had to stop reading until the tears cleared enough for her to see. But if you're reading this letter some other way. The tone shifted. Sarah felt it immediately, a heaviness that hadn't been there before, a shadow creeping across her husband's words. "If something happened to me. If the job finally caught up with me the way we always knew it might. If you're reading this at my funeral instead of at our favorite restaurant." Sarah's breath caught in her throat. He knew. Some part of James had known he might not come home. Then I need you to understand why I hid this letter in my uniform pocket. I put it there 3 days ago, right after I found out about the baby. I told myself it was just a precaution. Just in case. Firefighters do stuff like that. Write letters, make plans, prepare for the worst while hoping for the best. Sarah thought about all the times James had kissed her goodbye before a shift. All the times he'd held her a little too long, looked at her a little too deeply, as if he were memorizing her face. He had been saying goodbye. Every single time. Just in case. If you're reading this at my funeral, then I need you to know that I'm sorry. I'm so sorry I won't be there to hold your hand through the morning sickness. I'm sorry I won't be there to paint the nursery or argue about whether we're having a boy or a girl. I'm sorry I won't be there to pace the hospital waiting room like a nervous wreck while you do all the hard work. Sarah couldn't stop the sobs now. They tore through her chest like wildfire, raw and primal and completely beyond her control. 200 mourners watched in stunned silence as the widow fell apart in front of her husband's open coffin, clutching a letter and a tiny ring that none of them understood. But the letter wasn't finished. There was more. And what came next would change everything, not just for Sarah, but for everyone who witnessed what happened in Greenwood Chapel that morning. Because James Mitchell's secret wasn't just about a pregnancy. It was about something far bigger. Something that connected the past and the future in ways no one could have predicted. Something that would finally explain why Max had been so desperate to open that coffin. Sarah wiped her eyes with the back of her hand and forced herself to keep reading. The next paragraph started with 5 words that made her blood run cold. There's something else you need to know. To be continued in Chapter 4. Sarah's hands trembled so violently she nearly dropped the letter. There's something else you need to know. Those 5 words hung in the air like a gathering storm. The chapel had fallen into absolute silence. No whispers, no shifting in seats, no crying children. Even Max had stopped moving, his body pressed against Sarah's leg as if anchoring her to the earth. She forced her eyes to continue reading. I never told you the full story about how I got Max. I said the department assigned him to me, that it was random, that we just happened to work well together. But that wasn't the complete truth. There was a reason Max came into my life. A reason I've been carrying for 7 years. A reason that connects to you in ways you're about to understand. Sarah looked down at the German shepherd. His dark eyes gazed up at her with an expression she couldn't quite read, something deeper than loyalty, something almost human. What secret could possibly connect her to this dog? She kept reading. 7 years ago, before I ever met you, I responded to a house fire on Birchwood Lane. Small house, older neighborhood, nothing unusual at first glance. But when we arrived, a woman was standing on the front lawn, screaming that her daughter was trapped inside. The girl was only 19 years old. Home from college for the weekend. Asleep in her childhood bedroom when the fire started. Sarah's brow furrowed. She didn't recognize this story. James had never mentioned a fire on Birchwood Lane, never talked about a 19-year-old girl. Why would he keep something like this hidden? The fire was bad, Sarah. Really bad. The kind of fire that makes veterans like Rodriguez take a step back and reassess. But I couldn't wait for reassessment. I could hear her screaming from inside. So I went in. Sarah's chest tightened. Of course he went in. That's who James was, the man who ran toward danger while everyone else ran away. It was the quality she loved most about him. It was also the quality that killed him. I found her in the back bedroom, pinned under a fallen beam. She was unconscious by the time I reached her, smoke inhalation already taking hold. I couldn't lift the beam alone. It was too heavy, the fire too close, and I was running out of time. I radioed for backup, but I knew they wouldn't make it. Not in time. I was going to fail. Sarah could picture it perfectly. Her husband trapped in a burning room, a young woman dying at his feet, the weight of impossible choices crushing down on him. And then I heard barking. Sarah's breath caught. Loud, desperate barking from somewhere outside the window. I looked up and saw a German shepherd clawing at the glass, trying to break through. He wasn't wearing a department vest. He wasn't part of any rescue team. He was just a dog, a stray, I thought, who had somehow found his way to that exact window at that exact moment. Tears began forming in Sarah's eyes again. She sensed where this story was heading, but she needed to read every word. I don't know how to explain what happened next. The dog broke through the window, shattered it with his own body, and ran straight to the beam pinning the girl down. He started digging at the floor beneath it, loosening the floorboards, creating just enough space for me to slide her free. It was impossible. It shouldn't have worked. But it did. Sarah looked down at Max again. His graying muzzle rested against her knee now, his eyes never leaving her face. This was that dog. Max had saved James' life 7 years before they ever met. I carried the girl out just as the ceiling collapsed behind us. 10 seconds later, and we both would have been dead. The dog followed us out, limping from cuts on his paws, glass embedded in his shoulder. He had nearly killed himself trying to save a stranger. Sarah's hand moved instinctively to Max's head, her fingers threading through his coarse fur. The girl survived, Sarah. She spent 3 weeks in the hospital, but she made a full recovery. She went back to college. Graduated with honors. Got a job teaching kindergarten at Cedar Falls Elementary School. Sarah's entire body went rigid. No, it couldn't be. Her name was Sarah Reynolds. Before she became Sarah Mitchell. The letter nearly slipped from her frozen fingers. She was the girl from the fire. 7 years ago, James had carried her unconscious body out of a burning building while a stray German shepherd created an impossible escape route. She had no memory of it. The doctors said the smoke inhalation had caused temporary amnesia around the trauma. Her mother had told her she was rescued by a firefighter, but the details were always vague, and Sarah had never pressed for more information. She didn't want to remember. She wanted to forget the nightmares, the smell of smoke that haunted her for months, the scars on her back that she kept hidden beneath long shirts and careful positioning. But James knew. James had always known. I never told you because I didn't want you to feel obligated to me, the letter continued. When I saw you at that coffee shop 3 years later, sitting alone by the window reading a book about child psychology, I recognized you immediately. But you didn't recognize me. And I thought maybe that was better. Maybe I could get to know you as a regular person instead of the firefighter who saved your life. Sarah remembered that coffee shop. She remembered the handsome stranger who had approached her table with a nervous smile and asked if anyone was sitting across from her. She remembered thinking he seemed familiar somehow, like a face from a dream she couldn't quite recall. Now she understood why. I fell in love with you for real, Sarah. Not because I saved you, but because you saved me right back. You gave me something to live for beyond the job. You gave me a home. And now you're giving me something I never thought I'd have. A child. A family. A future. The tears were flowing freely now, dripping onto the letter and smearing the ink at the edges. Sarah didn't care. She couldn't stop reading even if she wanted to. Max never forgot you either. When I adopted him from the shelter 2 years ago, that same stray who had crashed through the window, he recognized your scent immediately. That's why he follows you everywhere. That's why he guards you so carefully. In his mind, you're the girl he helped save. Your pack. And now that you're carrying our baby, you're something even more precious. Sarah remembered the first day Max came home. He had walked straight to her, ignored James completely, and pressed his body against her legs like he had known her for years. Because he had. In his own way, Max had known her longer than James did. I need you to understand why I'm telling you all of this now, James wrote. If something happens to me, if I don't come home, you need to know that this wasn't random. You and me, this life we built together, it wasn't an accident. It was meant to be. Some people call it fate. Some people call it God. I just call it the most beautiful gift I've ever received. Sarah's sobs echoed through the silent chapel. She was vaguely aware of mourners crying with her, of tissues being passed down pews, of Captain Rodriguez removing his hat and pressing it against his chest. But she wasn't finished. There was still more. One final paragraph remained, the closing words of a dead man to the woman who carried his child. Sarah, I need you to promise me something. She held her breath. If I'm gone, don't mourn forever. Don't close yourself off from love. Don't let our child grow up thinking that grief is the only way to honor the dead. Live, sweetheart. Laugh. Fall in love again if you find someone worthy, though I have to warn you, I'll be haunting any guy who doesn't treat you like the queen you are. A broken laugh escaped Sarah's lips. But most importantly, let Max protect you. He saved both of us once, And he'll do it again. Trust him. Listen to him. He knows things we can't understand. And when our baby is born. Sarah turned the page over, searching for the rest of the sentence. But the letter ended there. Mid-sentence. Unfinished. As if James had been interrupted while writing and never got the chance to complete his final thought. Sarah flipped the paper over again, desperately searching for more words. There had to be more. He couldn't leave her hanging like this. He couldn't. That's when she noticed it. A second piece of paper. Folded smaller than the first. Hidden beneath the velvet lining where the ring had rested. She hadn't seen it before because the ring box had a false bottom, a secret compartment designed to conceal something precious. Sarah's fingers trembled as she lifted the hidden paper. This one wasn't a letter. It was a photograph. An ultrasound image dated 3 weeks ago, 2 days before the fire on Oak Street. And written on the back in James' handwriting were 2 words that made Sarah's heart stop completely. Twins. Surprise. Twins. The word echoed through Sarah's mind like thunder rolling across an endless sky. She stared at the ultrasound image, her eyes tracing the 2 distinct shapes captured in grainy black and white. 2 tiny forms. 2 flickering heartbeats frozen in time. 2 lives growing inside her body that she hadn't even known existed until this very moment. James had known. For 2 days before he died, her husband had carried this incredible secret, the knowledge that they weren't just having a baby. They were having 2. And he never got the chance to tell her. Sarah pressed the photograph against her chest, her body shaking with sobs that came from somewhere so deep she didn't know the place existed. The chapel had become a blur of faces and flowers and flickering candlelight. Nothing felt real anymore. Nothing made sense. Except Max. The German shepherd pressed closer against her legs, his warm body anchoring her to the present moment. His dark eyes gazed up at her with an expression of pure, unwavering devotion, the same devotion he had shown 7 years ago when he crashed through a burning window to save a stranger. He had known about the twins too. That's why he had been so insistent. That's why he couldn't stop barking at the coffin. That's why he had pressed his nose against her stomach with such desperate urgency. He wasn't just alerting to 1 heartbeat. He was alerting to 2. Sarah finally understood everything. The letter. The ring. The photograph. The secret compartment hidden beneath velvet lining. James had prepared all of this because some part of him sensed he might not come home. Some deep instinct, the same instinct that made him run into burning buildings, had whispered that time was running out. So he left her a treasure map. And Max was the key to finding it. Captain Rodriguez stepped forward slowly, his weathered face wet with tears he didn't bother hiding. He knelt beside Sarah, one hand resting gently on her shoulder. "Sarah," he said softly, "what did the letter say?" She couldn't speak. Words had abandoned her completely. Instead, she simply handed him the photograph, watching his face as understanding dawned. His eyes widened. "Twins," he breathed. Dear God. He was going to be a father of twins. The whisper spread through the chapel like wildfire. Mourners leaned forward in their pews, straining to hear. Tissues pressed against mouths. Hands clutched hearts. The tragedy had somehow become even more profound. A hero who died saving lives would never meet the 2 lives he had helped create. But then something shifted. Sarah felt it before she understood it. A subtle change in the atmosphere, a lifting of the crushing weight that had pressed down on her chest since she first received the news about James. He was gone. Nothing could change that. But he had left her something more precious than memories. He had left her a future. 2 futures, actually. 2 children who would carry his smile, his courage, his ridiculous ears. 2 little humans who would grow up hearing stories about their father, the firefighter who saved lives, the man who loved their mother before he even knew her name, the hero who prepared for goodbye while hoping he'd never have to say it. Sarah rose slowly to her feet, the letter and photograph and tiny ring still clutched against her chest. Max rose with her. She turned to face the 200 mourners who had come to say goodbye to her husband. Their faces blurred together through her tears. Friends, neighbors, colleagues, strangers who had read about the Oak Street fire in the newspaper and felt compelled to pay their respects. They had come expecting a funeral. They had witnessed something else entirely. James knew, Sarah said, her voice hoarse but steady. He knew about the babies. He knew he might not come home. And he made sure I would find this, that Max would help me find this, because he wanted me to understand something. She paused, gathering strength from somewhere she didn't know she possessed. He wanted me to understand that love doesn't end. It transforms. It grows. It finds new ways to reach across the impossible distance between life and death. He's gone, but he's not really gone. He'll live on in these children. He'll live on every time Max guards their crib at night. He'll live on in every story I tell them about their brave, ridiculous, wonderful father. Sarah looked down at the German shepherd standing faithfully at her side. And he'll live on in this dog. This incredible, impossible dog who has saved my life twice now, once from a fire I don't even remember, and once from a grief that might have swallowed me whole. She knelt beside Max, wrapping her arms around his thick neck, burying her face in his graying fur. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you for not giving up. Thank you for barking until someone finally listened." Max's tail wagged slowly, just once, as if to say, "This is what I was born for." The funeral continued after that, but everything had changed. Pastor Bradley delivered a eulogy that somehow captured James' spirit, his humor, his bravery, his deep and abiding love for the people he served. Captain Rodriguez shared stories from the firehouse that made mourners laugh through their tears. And when the ceremony finally ended, nobody rushed to leave. They lingered. They embraced Sarah and told her stories about James she had never heard. They knelt beside Max and thanked him for his service, for his loyalty, for his refusal to stay silent when silence would have been easier. They became a community bound together by tragedy and transformed by hope. 7 months later, on a warm Tuesday morning in May, Sarah gave birth to twins at Cedar Falls Memorial Hospital. A boy and a girl. James Michael Mitchell Jr. arrived at 3:47 a.m., screaming with lungs that would have made his father proud. His sister, Grace Elena Mitchell, followed 4 minutes later, quieter, more observant, with eyes that seemed to hold ancient wisdom. Sarah placed the tiny silver ring on a chain around Jamie's neck, right over his beating heart. She bought a matching chain for Grace, threading it with a small silver locket containing her father's photograph. When they came home from the hospital 3 days later, Max was waiting. The old German shepherd had barely moved from his spot by the front door since Sarah left for the delivery. His hips ached. His muzzle had turned almost entirely gray. But his eyes were bright and alert as the carriers crossed the threshold. He approached slowly. He sniffed Jamie first, a long, careful investigation that ended with a gentle lick on the infant's tiny hand. Then he moved to Grace, repeating the ritual with the same tender precision. When he finished, Max looked up at Sarah. His tail wagged. His mission was complete. He had found them. He had protected them. He had kept his promise to the man who saved him from a shelter and gave him a second chance at purpose. That night, Max lay down between the 2 cribs, his body positioned so he could watch both babies simultaneously. He stayed there every night for the next 3 years, until his hips finally gave out completely and the veterinarian said it was time. Sarah held him as he took his final breath, whispering thank you over and over until the words lost all meaning. They buried him in the backyard, beneath the oak tree where James used to throw tennis balls on summer evenings. The headstone read simply, Max Guardian. Hero. Family. Jamie and Grace grew up knowing everything: the fire on Birchwood Lane, the rescue on Oak Street, the funeral where a loyal dog refused to stop barking until the truth came out. They grew up knowing that love transcends death. They grew up knowing that loyalty speaks louder than words. And they grew up knowing that sometimes, the ones who can't speak are the ones who understand the most. Because that's what family does. It protects. It perseveres. It refuses to give up. And sometimes, just sometimes, it barks until someone finally listens. This story found its way to you for a reason. Maybe you needed a reminder that love endures beyond goodbye. Maybe you needed to believe that loyalty still exists in this world. Or maybe you simply needed a good cry and a reason to hug your pet a little tighter tonight. Whatever brought you here, thank you for staying until the end. If this story touched your heart, do me a favor right now. Hit that subscribe button and join our family here at Heart of a Dog. Tap the notification bell so you never miss another story that moves your soul. Drop a comment below telling me about your own loyal companion. I read every single one, and your stories inspire everything I create. Share this video with someone who needs to hear it today. You never know whose heart might need healing. And remember, the ones who love us never truly leave. They live on in every sunrise, every memory, every heartbeat that carries their legacy forward. Until next time, take care of each other. And take care of the animals who take care of you.